The summons arrived without ceremony, which was unsettling in itself. Important messages usually came wrapped in layers of formality, like gifts no one wanted to open. This one simply appeared on the human's console, blinking once, as if unsure whether it should even exist. He stared at it for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair and said to no one in particular, "That's never a good sign." By the time he reached the royal complex, the atmosphere had already shifted from tense to something closer to barely controlled panic. The corridors, usually silent except for the soft hum of energy flowing through their walls, now echoed with hurried footsteps and clipped voices. Alien guards moved past him with a precision that tried very hard to look like confidence and failed in small, noticeable ways. One nearly collided with him, paused just long enough to mutter an apology, and then kept going without waiting for a response. "Reassuring," the human murmured, adjusting his jacket as he walked. "Nothing says everything is under control like sprinting security." He had expected a formal reception, perhaps a briefing, or at the very least someone pretending to know what was happening. Instead, he was escorted directly toward the inner chambers, the air growing warmer, heavier, as though the building itself was holding its breath. Somewhere ahead, something crashed, loud enough to vibrate through the floor beneath his feet. He stopped. "That sounded expensive." The guard beside him didn't answer. That was answer enough. They reached a set of tall, translucent doors that shimmered faintly, reacting to their presence. Through the surface, blurred shapes moved rapidly, shadows colliding and recoiling. Another sharp noise followed, this one unmistakably the sound of something breaking. The human tilted his head, considering. "Let me guess," he said lightly. "Diplomatic discussion?" The doors parted. Chaos wasn't quite the right word for what lay beyond. Chaos implied randomness, a lack of pattern. This had a pattern. It was just a violent one. At the center of the chamber stood the princess. She looked at first glance almost human. Her posture, her movements, even the structure of her face carried a familiar symmetry. But the differences were unmistakable. Her ears extended longer than any human's, elegant and sharp, twitching with every sound in the room as if each noise struck them physically. Her expression was not anger, not exactly. It was something sharper, more desperate. Around her, guards struggled to maintain distance. One approached cautiously, speaking in a low, steady tone. He didn't get far. She moved faster than seemed possible, her reaction immediate, instinctive. The guard was thrown aside, not with deliberate cruelty, but with the raw force of someone trying to escape something invisible. The human blinked. "Well," he said under his breath, "that's new." Another attempt. Another failure. The room filled with overlapping sounds, orders, warnings, the low hum of defensive systems activating. The lights flickered briefly, as if even they were unsure whether to stay. The princess turned suddenly, her gaze sweeping across the room. For a moment, everything stilled. Then her attention locked onto him. There was no warning, no gradual shift. 1 second she was across the chamber. The next she was moving toward him with alarming speed. The guard beside him tensed, raising a weapon he clearly hoped not to use. "Don't," the human said quickly, though he wasn't entirely sure why. The distance closed. He had exactly enough time to think that this was a terrible idea before instinct took over. He didn't step back. He didn't reach for anything. He simply stood there, arms slightly open, as if expecting something entirely different to happen. She reached him. For a fraction of a second, there was tension. Sharp, electric, the kind that made the air feel thin. Her expression shifted, confusion cutting through the storm in her eyes. Then, without warning, the energy vanished. Her body slackened. She fell forward. The human caught her. The impact was lighter than he expected, though not by much. He adjusted his stance automatically, one arm supporting her weight, the other steadying her as her head came to rest against his shoulder. The room went silent. Not quieter. Silent. He looked down at her, waiting for the next movement, the next sudden burst of energy. It didn't come. Her breathing slowed, evened out, the tension in her frame dissolving completely. "She's asleep?" he said, glancing up. No one answered. Several guards stared at him as though he had just rewritten the laws of physics out of boredom. One of the advisors opened his mouth, closed it again, and then tried once more, producing a sound that didn't quite form a word. The human shifted slightly, adjusting his grip. "I'm going to go ahead and assume this is unusual," he added. Still no response. He cleared his throat, glancing around at the stunned faces, the frozen positions. The entire room caught in a moment it didn't know how to process. Then he looked back down at the princess, who remained completely still, peacefully asleep as if none of the previous chaos had ever happened. "Well," he said quietly, "that's one way to make an entrance." After a brief pause, he added, "Next time, I'd really appreciate a warning." No one moved for several seconds, which was impressive considering how many of them had been sprinting moments ago. The silence had weight now, pressing down on the room as if even the air didn't want to interfere with whatever had just happened. The human shifted his footing again, careful not to disturb the princess. Her breathing was steady, calm in a way that felt almost deliberate, as if her body had decided it had reached its limit and simply turned everything off. He glanced around at the still frozen court. "So," he said quietly, "is there a protocol for this? Or do we all just stand here and contemplate reality?" One of the advisors blinked rapidly as if waking from a dream. This does not occur," he managed, voice thin. "Clearly it does," the human replied. "She's doing it right now." Another crash echoed faintly from somewhere deeper in the palace, like a reminder that things had not, in fact, magically resolved themselves. The guards exchanged uncertain looks. One of them took a cautious step forward, then stopped as the princess shifted slightly in the human's arms. That was enough. The guard froze mid-step. "Right," the human muttered. "We're going to need a better system than panic and hope." A figure moved through the gathered crowd then, and unlike the others, she did not hesitate. The queen entered the chamber with a presence that quieted even the thoughts people hadn't spoken. Her long ears, identical in structure to her daughter's, were held still, controlled, but there was tension in the way her gaze fixed immediately on the human. More precisely, on her daughter. For a moment, nothing passed between them. Then the queen stepped closer, slow, measured. The guards parted instinctively. The human gave a small, awkward nod. "I assume she's yours." There was the faintest shift in the queen's expression, something that might have been amusement if it weren't buried under layers of concern. "She is," she said. "Good," he replied. "I was worried I'd accidentally adopted someone important." A few of the advisors made small, distressed sounds. The queen ignored them entirely. "How is she?" she asked. The human glanced down again. "Peaceful," which, judging by the room we just walked into, is a significant improvement. The queen studied her daughter's face, searching for something, any sign that this was temporary, unstable, an illusion waiting to break. When none came, her attention shifted to the human. "What did you do?" He considered that for a moment. "I stood there," he said. "Very professionally, I might add." "That is not an answer. It's the only one I have." Behind them, the advisors had begun whispering again, their voices low but urgent. Words like neural resonance, adaptive field, and impossible drifted through the air, none of them particularly helpful. The human tilted his head slightly. "Are they always like this?" "They are attempting to understand," the queen replied, "by saying complicated things very quickly. That is their preferred method." "Fascinating. We should try it more often on my planet. It usually leads to funding." The queen's gaze lingered on him a moment longer, as if weighing something. Then she made a subtle gesture. Two attendants stepped forward, hesitant but obedient. "Prepare a controlled environment," she said. "Minimal stimuli." The attendants nodded and moved quickly, relief evident in their movements now that they had a clear task. The human raised an eyebrow. "Controlled environment. I like the sound of that. Does it come with seating?" "You will not be required to stand indefinitely," the queen said. "Excellent. I was starting to feel like a decorative statue." As if on cue, the princess shifted again, her fingers curling slightly against his sleeve. The entire room tensed in response. He sighed softly. If everyone could not react to every minor movement like it's the end of the universe, that would help, he said. She's asleep, not plotting. She has done both before, one advisor muttered. Impressive, the human replied. Multitasking. They began moving then, slowly, carefully, as if any sudden change might shatter the fragile calm. The path through the palace felt different now, quieter, less frantic. Word had already spread. He could see it in the way people stepped aside, staring not at him, but at the princess resting in his arms. One guard leaned toward another as they passed. Is she contained? He whispered. The human didn't break stride. I prefer comfortable, he said. The guard straightened immediately, pretending he hadn't spoken. The chamber they entered next was dimmer. The lighting softened to a gentle glow that seemed to absorb rather than reflect. The hum of the palace systems was quieter here, almost distant. It felt calmer. That's better, the human murmured. I might fall asleep too. Please do not, the queen said. No promises. He stepped inside, adjusting his grip as he lowered himself into the indicated seat. The princess remained still, her head resting lightly against him, her breathing unchanged. The advisors hovered at the edges of the room, their instruments already active, scanning, recording, analyzing every detail they could capture. One approached cautiously, holding a small device that emitted a soft pulse of light. Do you mind? The advisor asked. Yes, the human said immediately. The advisor blinked. You mind? I don't know what that does, and I'm currently holding your future ruler. So yes, I mind. The advisor hesitated, then looked to the queen. She gave a slight nod. Proceed with caution. Ah, the human said. That reassuring phrase again. The device activated, a faint ripple passing over the princess. She stirred slightly, her grip tightening for a brief second before relaxing again. The entire room held its breath. Then nothing happened. The advisor exhaled slowly, relief evident. Stability remains intact, he said. Wonderful, the human replied. Let's not ruin that. The queen stepped closer once more, her voice quieter now. This connection, it should not exist. Yet here we are, he said. She studied him carefully. You may be the first to ever calm her. He gave a small shrug. I have that effect on people. Usually it's because they lose interest. But I'll take this version. For the first time, the queen allowed the faintest hint of a smile to surface. It didn't last long, but it was there. The first thing she did when she woke up was breathe in sharply, as if she had been submerged and had just found air again. The second thing she did was not attack anyone, which, judging by the visible relief in the room, was already considered a remarkable improvement. The human felt the shift before he saw it, a slight tension in her shoulders, a subtle change in the rhythm of her breathing. He glanced down. Good morning, he said quietly, if that's what we're calling it. Her eyes opened slowly. They were focused, alert, but not wild, not like before. For a moment she didn't move, didn't speak. She simply looked at him, studying his face with an intensity that might have been uncomfortable if it weren't so calm. You are still here, she said. Her voice was soft, controlled, with a faint undertone that seemed to vibrate just beneath the surface. It wasn't threatening, it was curious. I was told not to disappear suddenly, the human replied. Apparently that causes concern. She tilted her head slightly, her long ears making a small, almost imperceptible movement, as if adjusting to the sound of his voice. You are quiet, he blinked. I've been called many things, he said. Quiet is new. She frowned faintly, as if trying to process that. Not your voice, you. She hesitated, searching for the right words. You do not press. Press. She lifted one hand slowly, gesturing vaguely toward the room, toward everything beyond him. Everything presses, sound, light, movement, thought. Her expression tightened slightly. You do not. The human considered that for a moment. Then he glanced toward the cluster of advisors standing at the edge of the room, all of them very clearly trying not to press anything. Well, he said, I've always been good at not contributing. That is not a skill, one advisor muttered under his breath. It absolutely is, the human replied without looking. Highly underrated. The princess's gaze flickered briefly toward the voices, and for a fraction of a second, something sharp passed through her expression. Not aggression, not fully, but tension, like a wire pulled too tight. The human noticed it immediately. Hey, he said softly. Her attention snapped back to him. Focus on me, he added, keeping his tone even. Ignore them. They're background noise. I hear everything, she said. Then we'll just have to be more interesting than everything else. That seemed to confuse her. She blinked, her ears twitching again, as if trying to filter something out. How? The human thought about that for exactly half a second. Well, he said, I could start telling you about my planet. That usually puts people to sleep. A faint pause followed. You already did that, she said. He frowned. I did. You spoke while I was not awake. She studied him again, more carefully this time. Your world has oceans that move constantly, but do not overwhelm themselves. He stared at her. You were listening? You were calm, she said simply. It helped. He let out a small breath, somewhere between a laugh and disbelief. Great, he murmured. I've been accidentally therapeutic. One of the advisors stepped forward slightly, unable to contain himself. Your Highness, if I may. The princess's head turned sharply toward him. The tension snapped back instantly. Her breathing changed. Faster. Her fingers curled slightly against the fabric of the human's sleeve. The air in the room seemed to shift with her, like a pressure building just beneath the surface. The advisor froze mid-sentence. Bad timing, the human said under his breath. He shifted slightly, just enough to bring her attention back without making it obvious. Hey, he said again, quieter this time. Her gaze flickered back to him, but the tension didn't fully disappear. Too much? He asked. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes moved, tracking something invisible, something only she could perceive. It is loud again, she said finally. The human nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Then we lower the volume. He glanced around the room. Everyone, he said, not raising his voice, but somehow making it carry. Less everything. That is not a measurable instruction, one advisor whispered. Figure it out, he replied. You're the experts. There was a brief, frantic moment where the room adjusted itself. Lights dimmed further. Devices powered down or shifted to silent modes. Even the subtle hum of the walls seemed to soften, as if responding to the command. The princess exhaled slowly. The tension eased. Not completely, but enough. Her grip on his sleeve loosened slightly. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. The difference was small, but noticeable. There, the human said. Better. She looked at him again, something new in her expression now. Not just curiosity, recognition. You change things, she said. He shook his head lightly. No, he said. I just ask loudly and hope people listen. That is still change. Fair point. There was a pause then, a quiet moment that felt almost normal, the kind of silence that didn't demand anything. She studied him again, her gaze softer now, less searching, more certain. Why do you stay close? She asked. The question caught him off guard, though he wasn't entirely sure why. He shrugged slightly. Because it helps, he said, and because no one's told me to stop yet. I could tell you to leave. He met her gaze. Do you want me to? She hesitated. Her ears shifted again, reacting to something distant, something faint. But this time she didn't lose focus. Her attention stayed on him. No, she said. The answer was quiet, but steady. The human nodded once. Then I guess I'm staying. Behind them, one of the advisors quietly updated a stream of data, his voice barely audible. Stability increasing, he murmured. Another leaned closer. Correlation confirmed. His presence is directly influencing her neural state. The human glanced back at them briefly. You know, he said, if you keep narrating everything, it's going to stop feeling special. They didn't respond. The princess tilted her head again, watching him. You make strange sounds, she said. He smiled faintly. That's called humor. It is inefficient. Most good things are. She considered that, her expression thoughtful. Then unexpectedly she shifted closer. Not abruptly, not out of need, but with a kind of quiet intention. Not collapsing this time, not seeking escape, just closer. The human blinked, adjusting slightly to accommodate the movement. Okay, he said softly. We're doing this now. Her head tilted just enough to rest lightly against his shoulder again, though her eyes remained open. Not asleep, just there. The room stayed silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. Less fragile, less afraid. The human let out a slow breath. You know, he said, I'm starting to think this job description was incomplete. The princess didn't respond, but she didn't move away either. The palace did not sleep. It merely dimmed itself, like a machine pretending to rest while quietly continuing its calculations. By the time the human realized how long he had been sitting there, the light beyond the chamber walls had shifted into a softer spectrum, one that painted everything in calm tones, whether it deserved it or not. The princess had not moved much. That alone seemed to confuse half the scientists in the room. She has maintained stability for an unprecedented duration, one of them whispered, as if speaking louder might ruin it. The human leaned back slightly, careful not to disturb her. You say that like she's a delicate experiment, he said. She's a person. She is both, another replied. Comforting, he muttered. The princess stirred just enough to make the entire room tense again. Her eyes opened, focused immediately, and for a brief moment her gaze drifted past him, toward the far wall where a faint hum pulsed through the structure. Her ears twitched sharply. There it is again, she said quietly. The human followed her gaze. What? The pattern, she said. It repeats. It scratches. He listened. To him it was nothing more than a low, consistent vibration, the kind that faded into the background after a few seconds. But the way she described it made it sound like something invasive, something persistent. Can you isolate it? One of the advisors asked, already activating a device. The princess's expression tightened. Do not add more, she said, her voice sharper now. The device powered down immediately. Right, the human said. Less is more. We established that. He shifted slightly, leaning forward as if trying to listen harder, though he knew it wouldn't help. Okay, he said. Let's try something. On my world, when something annoying repeats, we usually ignore it until it either stops or we lose our minds. Not ideal, but effective in a questionable way. She looked at him, unimpressed. That is not a solution. No, he admitted, but it's a tradition. A faint pause followed, and for a brief second, the tension in her expression softened. Not entirely, but enough to show she was trying to understand him rather than react to everything else. The queen entered the chamber again, this time without urgency, but with a focus that carried its own weight. Her eyes moved first to her daughter, then to the human, then briefly to the advisors, who immediately straightened as if posture alone could justify their existence. She remains stable, one of them said quickly. I can see that, the queen replied. Her gaze lingered on the princess, noting the subtle differences, the controlled breathing, the absence of violent movement, the quiet awareness instead of chaotic reaction. It was not just calm, it was something new. She speaks of patterns, the queen said. Yes, the human replied. Apparently your walls are irritating. They regulate the palace systems. They also scratch, he said, at least for her. The queen considered that. Those frequencies have existed for generations. Then maybe that's part of the problem, he said. If you've been living next to something that feels like constant noise, it's not surprising someone eventually reacts. One of the advisors hesitated. The frequencies are calibrated for optimal functionality. The human nodded slowly. Of course they are, because nothing has ever gone wrong with something labeled optimal. The princess shifted slightly again, her fingers brushing against the fabric of his sleeve as if grounding herself in something solid. It is louder when many things happen at once, you said. Voices, movement, light. It stacks. Stacks, the human repeated. Like layers. Yes, he nodded. Okay, that makes sense. The advisors immediately began recording again, their devices flickering softly in the dim light. She is describing cumulative sensory overload, one whispered. Congratulations, the human said. You've discovered what she just told you. The queen stepped closer, her voice quieter now. This condition, it has worsened with each generation. The human glanced at her. Because you keep the same environment. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. You suggest we change the foundation of our world. I suggest you stop ignoring what's clearly not working, he replied. You've been adapting her to the system. Maybe it's time the system adapts to her. Silence followed that, the kind that wasn't empty, but heavy with implication. The princess looked between them, her attention moving carefully, as if even conversation had weight now. You argue, she said. Gently, the human replied. It feels loud. He winced slightly. Right, we'll work on that. He leaned back again, exhaling slowly. Okay, he said, more to himself than anyone else. Let's simplify things. You feel too much, too fast, all at once. She nodded. And when I'm here, it slows, she said. Not because I'm special, he added quickly, but because I'm, what, less intense? You are steady, she said. He considered that. I'll take it. One of the advisors stepped forward again, more cautiously this time. If his presence stabilizes her neural activity, we may be able to replicate. No, the princess said immediately. The word cut through the room with surprising force. The advisor froze. The human raised an eyebrow. That sounded important. She looked at him, her expression firm now. Not the same. Okay, he said. We won't replicate anything without permission. That seems like a reasonable rule. The queen watched this exchange carefully, noting not just the words, but the way her daughter held her ground, the way she chose to respond rather than react. She has never refused like that before, one advisor whispered. She has never been given the chance, the queen replied quietly. The human glanced between them. You know, he said, this whole situation is starting to feel less like a medical issue and more like a communication problem. That is an oversimplification, the advisor said. Most solutions start that way, he replied. The princess shifted again, this time sitting up slightly, though she remained close enough that her shoulder still touched his arm. Her movements were slower now, deliberate, as if she was learning her own limits. It is quieter, she said. Good, the human replied. She looked at him again, studying his face with that same focused curiosity. You are still unfinished. He blinked. I was hoping that part would go away. It has not, he sighed. Story of my life. A faint pause followed. Then unexpectedly she made a small sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite anything defined, but something lighter than anything she had expressed before. The human tilted his head. Was that humor? She hesitated. It was less heavy. I'll take that too, he said. Across the room, the advisors stared at their data, at the readings that no longer matched their expectations, at the patterns that refused to behave the way they were supposed to. The queen remained still, her gaze fixed on her daughter, on the subtle shifts that no machine could fully measure. For the first time in a very long time, the chaos had not returned. And for the first time, no one rushed to prepare for it. By the next cycle, the palace had begun behaving differently, which would have been impressive if it didn't feel so reluctant about it. Lights dimmed before anyone asked. The hum in the walls softened as if the structure itself had decided to be less irritating. Entire corridors were cleared of unnecessary movement, leaving long stretches of quiet space that felt almost unfamiliar. The human noticed immediately. Someone finally listened, he said, looking around as they moved through one of the inner halls. Adjustments were made, the queen replied, walking beside them with her usual composed precision. That's a very elegant way of saying, we should have done this a long time ago, he said. The queen did not respond, which he had come to recognize as a sign that he was probably correct. The princess walked on his other side, not behind, not ahead, beside. Her movements were slower than before, but not hesitant, measured. Every step seemed deliberate, as if she was testing the world one piece at a time. Her ears twitched occasionally, reacting to distant sounds, but the sharp tension from before was gone. Now when she reacted, it was brief, contained. It is quieter, she said again, as if confirming it for herself. Don't get used to it, the human replied. My planet is extremely loud. You'd last about 3 minutes. She glanced at him. I would adapt. He smiled faintly. That's what everyone says. They entered a larger chamber, one that had clearly been modified in a hurry. Devices lined the walls, but most of them were powered down or running at minimal output. A central platform had been arranged with seating, though the arrangement looked like it had been designed by someone who had read about comfort, but never actually experienced it. The human stopped, examining it. This looks like a chair designed by a committee. It meets all ergonomic standards, one of the advisors said defensively. Of course it does, the human replied. That's the problem. The princess moved past him, stepping onto the platform without hesitation. She paused for a moment, then sat, her posture relaxed but alert. Her gaze drifted across the room, taking in the changes, the absence of overwhelming input. It does not press, she said. High praise, the human said. You should put that on a brochure. One of the advisors approached slowly, holding a device that projected a soft, shifting field of light. He hesitated before activating it. Minimal stimulation, he said, more to himself than anyone else. The field expanded gently, barely visible, more like a change in atmosphere than a visual effect. The princess watched it, her head tilting slightly. It is soft, she said. The advisor exhaled in relief. Good. The human folded his arms. Careful, he said. You're getting dangerously close to success. Another advisor stepped forward, unable to contain his curiosity. We have begun mapping the interaction between your neural patterns and her sensory response, he said to the human. There is a synchronization effect. Of course there is, the human interrupted. There's always a synchronization effect. It is not simple, the advisor insisted. Your presence appears to stabilize her input processing, reducing overload by being boring, the human said. The advisor blinked. That is not, I'm not exciting, the human continued. I don't spike anything. No sudden movements, no overwhelming signals. I'm neutral. The princess looked at him. You are not neutral, he raised an eyebrow. Oh? You are steady, she said again. Not empty. He paused at that, considering it longer than he expected. Well, he said finally, that's slightly better than boring. Across the room, another group of advisors whispered among themselves, their voices low but intense. If this can be replicated, it cannot, the princess said sharply. The room stilled. She didn't raise her voice, but the certainty in it was enough. The human glanced at her. You really don't like that idea. It is not the same, she said. You are not a pattern. That might be the nicest insult I've ever received. The queen stepped forward, her gaze moving between them. There are those who believe this situation creates risk, she said. The human tilted his head. Of course there are. They question your influence, she continued. I question it too, he said. I just do it less dramatically. They believe you could manipulate her. He looked genuinely confused. I can barely convince her to listen to my jokes. They are inefficient, the princess added. Thank you, he said. The queen's expression remained steady. There are factions within the court who would prefer a more controlled solution. Meaning what? The human asked. She did not answer immediately. The silence stretched just enough to make the answer clear. Right, he said. I'm not going to like that. The princess shifted slightly, her attention sharpening. They would take you away, she said. The human blinked. Well, that's rude. Her expression tightened, not with panic, but with something more focused, protective. That would not improve stability, one advisor said quickly. It would create instability, another added. Thank you for the support, the human said. I feel very valued. The queen raised a hand, silencing the room. Nothing will be decided without full understanding, she said. Good, the human replied, because I'd like to understand why I'm suddenly part of a political problem. You are not part of it, the queen said. He gestured lightly toward the room. I'm standing in the middle of it. The princess stood then, her movement smooth but deliberate. She stepped closer to him again, reducing the distance without hesitation. This is correct, she said. He glanced down at her. What is? You stay, she said. The simplicity of it made several advisors visibly uncomfortable. The human sighed softly. You know, he said, I had a much simpler life before this. She looked at him. Was it better? He thought about it. Then he shrugged. It was quieter, he admitted, but not necessarily better. She seemed to accept that. Across the room, the advisors returned to their data, their calculations, their endless attempt to explain something that refused to fit neatly into their models. The queen watched everything in silence, her gaze sharp, her thoughts unreadable. And somewhere beneath all of it, the palace continued to adjust, to shift, to slowly become something it had never been before. Less overwhelming, less certain, and for the first time slightly more human. The announcement was a mistake. At least that was the human's immediate conclusion as he stood at the edge of the grand hall, watching a carefully assembled audience pretend not to stare at the princess, like she might suddenly redefine physics again. The chamber was vast, built to impress and intimidate in equal measure, with towering structures that pulsed faintly with controlled energy. Today, however, someone had decided it should also host a public demonstration. "Whose idea was this?" he muttered. The queen stood beside him, composed as ever. "It was necessary." "Of course it was," he said. "Nothing says stable environment like gathering hundreds of people to quietly panic together." The princess stood a short distance away, positioned at the center of the hall. She was calm, visibly so, but there was tension beneath it, subtle, like a current just below the surface. Her ears moved more frequently now, reacting to the layered noise of the room. Footsteps, whispers, distant mechanical vibrations, even the low-frequency resonance of the palace systems. "It is louder," she said, her voice controlled but strained. "Yeah," the human replied. "I noticed. It's like a festival, but without the fun parts." Around them, advisors monitored readings, their devices flickering with streams of data that grew more chaotic by the second. "Input levels are rising," one whispered. "Stabilization holding," another added, though he didn't sound convinced. The human stepped closer to the princess, lowering his voice. "Hey," he said, "focus." Her gaze flickered toward him, locking in for a moment. The tension eased, slightly. "Still here," he added, "not going anywhere." She nodded faintly, but her attention kept drifting, pulled by the overwhelming sensory storm building around her. The queen raised a hand, signaling the beginning of the demonstration. A low hum spread through the chamber as systems activated, projecting controlled stimuli into the space. Light patterns, sound modulation, energy fields designed to test her response. The human blinked. "You're kidding." "This is controlled," an advisor said quickly. "It doesn't look controlled," he replied. The princess stiffened. The light patterns intensified, shifting in precise, calculated rhythms. To the observers, it was elegant. To her, it was too much. Her breathing changed. Faster. Her hands tightened at her sides. "It is stacking," she said, her voice strained now. "Shut it down," the human said immediately. "Not yet," an advisor replied. "We need more data." The human turned sharply. "You're about to get data you won't like." The princess's ears twitched violently, reacting to overlapping frequencies the others couldn't even perceive. Her focus shattered, her gaze snapping from one point to another, unable to settle. The tension snapped. She moved. Not with the chaotic violence from before, but with something more dangerous, precision driven by overload. A nearby structure cracked as her hand struck it, not out of anger, but as a reaction to something only she could feel. The crowd recoiled. "Stability failing," one advisor shouted. "No kidding," the human muttered. He stepped forward, ignoring the sudden movement of guards preparing to intervene. "Hey," he called louder now. Her attention flickered, but didn't hold. Another pulse of light hit the chamber. That was enough. The overload surged. The human didn't think. He moved. Closing the distance quickly, he stepped directly into her line of sight, placing himself between her and the rest of the room. For a split second, her gaze locked onto him, but it was unstable, fractured. "Too much," she said, her voice breaking under the pressure. "I know," he said, "so we make it less." He didn't reach for her immediately. He didn't try to restrain her. He simply stayed there, steady, unmoving, giving her something consistent to focus on. "Look at me," he said. The chaos around them continued. Voices, movement, systems shutting down too slowly. But he didn't react to any of it. "Not them," he added. "Me." Her breathing was uneven, her focus slipping again and again. But each time, it returned to him. Briefly, then longer. "Good," he said quietly. "That's it." He stepped closer, slow enough not to startle her. "No surprises," he murmured. "Just me." The room dimmed as systems finally powered down, but the residual noise lingered, echoing in the space. Her hands trembled, her shoulders tensed. "I can't," she started. "Yes, you can," he said. "You've done it before." Her gaze locked onto his again. This time it held. The tension didn't vanish instantly. It unraveled slowly, like a knot being worked loose one thread at a time. He reached out then, carefully, giving her time to react. She didn't pull away. His hand rested lightly against her arm, grounding rather than controlling. "Focus on one thing," he said. "Not everything. Just one." Her breathing slowed, slightly. "That's it," he continued. "Everything else is background noise. Annoying, but survivable." A faint pause. Then slowly she stepped closer. The distance closed. Her head tilted slightly, not collapsing this time, but leaning, just enough to reconnect with that steady point. The room held its breath. The tension broke. Not violently, quietly. Her shoulders relaxed, her hands unclenched. The overload receded. "Stability returning," an advisor whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "No thanks to you," the human muttered under his breath. The princess exhaled slowly, her breathing evening out again. Her grip tightened slightly against his sleeve, not in panic, but in confirmation. "It is quieter," she said. "Yeah," he replied softly, "because we turned off the bad idea." A faint, almost imperceptible sound escaped her. Not quite a laugh, but close enough. Across the chamber, the queen stood perfectly still, watching everything with sharp, unblinking focus. The demonstration had failed in the way it was designed, but succeeded in a way no one had expected. The human glanced around at the stunned faces, the broken structure, the advisors staring at their data like it had personally betrayed them. "Well," he said, "I think we've learned something important today." No one responded. He nodded to himself. "Great," he added. "I'll write the report." The palace no longer tried to impress anyone. That was the first thing he noticed. The lights had been recalibrated, not dimmed into gloom, but softened into something intentional. The constant hum that once threaded through every corridor had been tuned down, broken into gentler intervals that no longer overlapped like competing voices. Even the movement of people had changed. Fewer rushed steps, fewer unnecessary gestures. It wasn't silence, not exactly. It was consideration. The human stood near one of the wide openings overlooking the inner structures of the capital, arms loosely crossed, watching a transport vessel glide past in the distance. It moved smoothly, its engines quieter than he remembered. "Careful," he murmured. "You're starting to look efficient." "You sound surprised." He glanced to the side. The queen stood a short distance away, her posture unchanged, but something about her presence had shifted. Less rigid, not softer exactly, but less guarded. "I'm impressed," he said. "That's different." She followed his gaze briefly. Change was overdue. That's a polite way of saying, we ignored this for generations. She did not argue. Behind them, the chamber doors opened with a muted sound. The princess entered without hesitation, her steps steady, her attention clear. She no longer moved like someone bracing against the world. She moved like someone who had learned how to exist within it. Her ears twitched once as she crossed the room, reacting to something distant, but the movement was brief, contained. "It is balanced," she said. The human nodded. "That's the goal." She stopped beside him, close enough that her shoulder brushed lightly against his arm. Not out of need, but habit, familiarity. "You adjusted the lower frequency layers," she added, looking toward the far structures. He raised an eyebrow. "I made a suggestion. Your people did the complicated part. They required many explanations." He smiled faintly. "I'm very good at repeating myself." The queen observed them both. The new systems are stabilizing not only her condition, but others we did not realize were affected. "Turns out ignoring a problem doesn't make it disappear," the human said. "Who knew?" One of the advisors entered quietly, carrying a small device that projected a calm, steady waveform. He paused at a respectful distance. Integration results are holding, he said. Sensory harmonics are within optimal range across all monitored sectors. The human looked at him. You sound happier. The advisor hesitated. We are less wrong than before. Progress, the human replied. The princess studied the waveform briefly, then looked back at the human. You are still here. Last I checked, he said, though I'm starting to suspect I missed my original departure window. You did, the advisor confirmed. He sighed. Of course I did. The queen stepped closer, her gaze steady. You are free to leave. The human glanced at her. That sounds like a test. It is not. He looked back toward the open space beyond the palace, where distant ships moved through the sky like quiet thoughts. I know, he said. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was the kind that allowed decisions to exist without pressure. The princess tilted her head slightly. Will you go? He considered the question longer than he expected. I used to think I understood where I belonged, he said slowly. Turns out, I was just used to it. She watched him, her expression focused but calm. And now, she asked. He looked down at her, then back at the shifting horizon beyond the palace. Now I think I'd like to stay until I understand this place as well as I thought I understood mine, he said. The advisor blinked. That may take a while, the human finished. I'm aware. The princess nodded once, as if that answer aligned with something she had already decided. That is acceptable, she said. Good, he replied, because I wasn't asking permission. A faint pause followed. Then unexpectedly, she made that same soft sound again. Not quite a laugh, but unmistakably lighter than anything she had expressed before. The human tilted his head. You're getting better at that. It is. Less inefficient, she said. I'll take it. The queen turned slightly, her gaze moving across the chamber, the palace, the quiet adjustments that had reshaped everything without tearing it apart. This began as a crisis, she said. Most important things do, the human replied. It became something else. He nodded. That's the part people usually don't plan for. The advisor glanced at his device again. Long-term projections indicate continued improvement. The human looked at him. Careful, he said. If you get too confident, something unexpected will happen. That is statistically probable, the advisor admitted. Good, the human said. Wouldn't want things to get boring. The princess shifted slightly closer again, her movement natural now, unforced. She didn't lean for support this time. She simply stood there, steady, her presence no longer defined by instability. It is quiet, she said. The human nodded. Yeah. She looked up at him. Not empty. He smiled faintly. That's important. Beyond the palace, another vessel passed, its movement smooth, its sound barely noticeable. The city below continued its quiet transformation, adapting in ways no one had expected, guided not by control, but by understanding. The human exhaled slowly, letting the moment settle. You know, he said, when I first got here, I thought I was walking into a problem. The princess tilted her head. You were? Yeah, he said. Turns out it wasn't the kind that needed fixing. The queen glanced at him. What kind was it? He looked at the two of them, then back at the world that had changed just enough to feel new. The kind that needed listening, he said. The advisor made a small note, as if trying to record something that didn't quite fit into data. The princess didn't respond immediately. Then quietly she reached out, not uncertain, not reactive, and rested her hand lightly against his arm. Not to hold on, just to be there. The human glanced down, then back out at the horizon. Well, he said softly, I guess that's part of the job now. This time no one corrected him.